You know, last time we were together, we talked about how God places people in a church. God's not the architect of a church where people just go to church. He's not the designer of a church where people just attend on Sundays. He is the creator of a church that He places people into. The churches that people just go to church, those churches are usually personality driven or tradition driven. If they're built on a personality, if that personality doesn't exist, the church falls. And if they're tradition driven, then over time, tradition's what drives them, not the Spirit. That's not God's design. God's design is a church that He places people into. Let me show you what He says in Psalms chapter 92. Psalms 92 verse 13. Those that are planted in the house of God shall flourish in the courts of God. God's design is that we are planted and placed into a church. And when we become planted, see, the thing about planted is we set roots, right? We are not just temporarily put in a pot and then move from this pot to this place to this place to this place where we're chasing the greatest amount of sun. Instead, we're planted where our roots take in. That's the way God designs church. And if we are placed into a church, we flourish. That's a part of what it means to be a part of a church. And when it comes to that church, there are two foundational elements that you and I are responsible for. The first element is that we are responsible in making sure that everybody in the church, everyone matters. Everyone matters. So let me read you what James writes about that. James is commenting, he's a pastor, and he's commenting about the church. And he's talking about how important everybody is into the church. And so he writes in James chapter 2, verse 2, he says, "For if a person comes into your congregation whose hands are adorned with gold and rings and who is wearing splendid apparel, and also a poor man comes and he's in shabby clothes, and you pay more attention or special attention to the one who wears the splendid clothes and says to him, 'Sit here in this preferred seat,' while I tell the poor man, 'Stand there,' or 'Sit there on the floor at my feet,' are you not discriminating among your own and becoming judged and having wrong motives?" That's what James writes. He says this is a problem. There is nobody more important than another. Everybody matters. And so a biblical understanding of the church that God builds, the biblical understanding of being a church member, is that each person is essential part. Each person is an essential part of the whole church. And here's how Paul says it in 1 Corinthians 12 and 12. He says, "For just as the body is in unity and yet has many parts, all parts, though many, form one body, and that is Christ, the body of Christ." Every part matters and every member matters. So that's the first foundational element, that everybody matters. You matter, and everybody in your group matters, and everybody you go to church with matters. The second foundational element is that we have to be a unified church. That it matters that we are connected as a body, unified together. Now, as a pastor, you would think that it's the pastor's responsibility to unify the church. The pastor leads in unity. He teaches what unifies somebody, but it's the members of the church that determine whether a church is unified or not. You know, and here's what Paul writes in Colossians chapter 3, verse 14, and he's writing about having love, he's writing about forgiving, he's writing about a lot of different things. But here's what he says. He says, "And above all these things, put on love, and enfold yourselves with the bond of perfectedness, which bonds together everything completely in harmony." He says it's our responsibility, your responsibility, my responsibility, to unify and be in harmony one with another, bonded together based on love. So here we are. What's it mean to be a member of a church? What's it mean for my church to be a part of my church? What does that mean when I say I go to church? What I'm saying is, number one, everybody in the church matters and they matter to me. And number two, I'm going to do my part to unify the church. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about my church.